And so your name is Jackson?
Yes, Alaric Jackson.
All
Yes.
right. Awesome, Alec Jackson. So I thank you for taking time out of your day to talk about this. We haven't
I
had a
thank you
chance.
for inviting me. I
Oh,
thank
you're
you for
welcome.
inviting me. Yeah.
So I'm not sure how you want to go about doing this. So the topic is obviously Daniel 8 and the 2300 evenings and mornings. And
Yeah.
I
I
think,
wanna I wanna kind of open up with something though,
sure.
because I was thinking about this the other day. So Daniel is the first part of the apocalyptic prophecy of Revelation, because Revelation carries on the message from Daniel, because remember that the God tells Daniel to seal up the book for a time until the end, right? So something very interesting about Daniel is that what I was looking at, because we have different periods. So Daniel is not just prophecy; it's also history. So understanding prophecy, we have to also understand history, all the prophecy that's been fulfilled until now, right? So
Yeah.
Daniel 2, for example, we start with Daniel 2, is the basic prophecy of the kingdoms, right? Because Gabriel explains to him, okay, this statue represents four kingdoms. For example, you have the head, which is Babylon. You have the arms, which is Media Persia. You have the Median Persia, and then you have the legs, like the legs and everything that is Greece, and then you have the feet, or not the feet, the legs. The legs. I think the waist is Greece, and then the leg is Rome, and then the feet is what we would consider as the mixed countries, the European countries, America, all of these other countries that do not mix. And so, like, you have the basic prophecy of that. Then, Daniel keeps going further with the prophecy because Gabriel has this huge message to tell Daniel for the end time prophecy. So Daniel contains not only prophecy of the kingdoms, but the prophecy until Jesus and also until the end of the world, correct? So Daniel 2 talks about that. Then you go to Daniel 7, which is a continuation of Daniel 2, but in a different light. You get to see more of the kingdoms and who they could be, you know? Daniel 8 extends that prophecy to the 2300 days. And it doesn't even end there because the 2300 days isn't the end of prophecy. No, Daniel also goes into Daniel 11 because Daniel 10 is just an explanation from Gabriel saying, hey, I've come to finish the prophecy. I've come to explain more of the prophecy that I was explaining to you in Daniel 9. And then Daniel 12 is the end of the prophecy, which is, it says in Daniel 12:1 that Michael will stand up, the prince of princes. He'll stand up and he'll come and rescue the people, right? His people. So now, Daniel 8 and Daniel 9. Daniel 9 is the explanation of the 2300 days. Daniel 8 is just explaining a little bit about the ram, and we know what the ram is. The ram would be Media Persia, while the other beast would be Greece, correct? It explains it. And so, like, I was what I was understanding about all of that is what we're about to talk about now. So you can continue what you wanted to say.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thanks for that. So I would obviously disagree with that connection of Daniel 8 and Daniel 9, meaning that the Daniel 9 is the mare, right? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is this. At the end of Daniel 8, Daniel expresses his confusion of the text, you know? And
Right.
so what Daniel does in the first part of 9 is he starts praying because he doesn't understand. And he's like, I don't understand. He's praying. He's praying for the people. And then he's also praying for the understanding. And so he says, okay, I don't know. So Gabriel comes back. If you read Daniel 9, you can find it. Daniel 9 says, he says this. Gabriel says, okay, now I've come to explain the prophecy. I've come to explain what your confusion. And so he also states when the 2300 days is this, you know, but it's not the complete 2300 days. It's the 70-week prophecy, which is from the rebuilding of the temple to the coming of the Messiah, the first coming of the Messiah. We know this because if we read correctly, 70 days, 70 weeks, sorry, it talks about how, it talks about how we go to Jesus and how the Messiah will make a covenant with people. But in the last week, which is the 70th week, says in the middle of that week, the Messiah will be cut off. So the 70-week prophecy is a part of the 2300 days, but it isn't the whole prophecy, because 70 weeks, if we take it as a literal 490 days, that's only like, it's a little bit of time and the Messiah didn't come then. But if you take it as a prophetic day for the year, then you can get to 490, which comes from 457 before Christ until the crucifixion of Jesus, you know, and his third, because Jesus' ministry lasted only 3.5 years. 3.5 years after that, which would complete the prophetic week, would be the stoning of Stephen. So the reason why I understand that Daniel 9 is a continuation of Daniel 8 is because of what Gabriel is saying to him. Gabriel tells him, okay, look, I'm explaining this. This is what it is. He explains it. And Daniel's a little, he still understands a little bit, but there's so much more he wants to understand. And it's because of what he says at the end of Daniel 8, you know? Because look, the 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. Or concerning thy people, concerning thy people and concerning the holy city, that is such a space of time is fixed upon, cut out. Yeah, that's the understanding of that. But this transgression to put an end, yes, the creed about your people and your holy city, you finish. The transgression to put an end to sin and to atone for iniquity, to bring in an everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint most holy place. So that's what Jesus did. What happened? Jesus died. He made a covenant with man, the new covenant that we always talk about. We say the old covenant's done. The new covenant's made because Jesus died. He says we do this and do that, and we follow Christ, right? So that's what that's talking about. The 70-week prophecy is really talking about Jesus is coming. And prophecy cannot be split up. That's not how the 2300 days is. You can't split up the 2300 days. And that's why Gabriel continues to explain it until Daniel 12. And that's how we know, because Daniel 11 explains even more about the time after and before, basically at the beginning of Rome. So it's after Medo-Persia with Greece, and it's at the beginning of Rome, because what the beast does in Daniel 8 is what is super interesting. I think I saw a little bit of your video with Mike, and you were talking about how the goats, the two rams are fighting, right? And you notice that there's a horn that comes out of the 4 horns. Now, what is interesting is how I've understood it and how I studied it, and not just because I'm an Adventist, but because I've studied it, is that the ram that destroys the other ram, the ram that destroys the other ram, he has 4 horns, and this ram represents Greece, because there's one notable horn that comes up in the middle. But what happens? That breaks, and 4 more come out, right? That's Alexander the Great. When Alexander the Great died, he gave his kingdom up to his 4 generals. What happened with that is because the generals wanted all of Greece, they started fighting. It says that these four horns, the power that this ram had, no longer has the same power as before. What happens with those four horns is one more horn comes up. What a lot of people can understand this as is Rome, because we know that Rome came after Greece. Rome conquered Greece, but not just conquered it. It assimilated their culture, their ideas, their gods into their rule and their power. Rome went all the way to Asia, went all the way to Africa, went even to the Holy City, which talks about that. And that even goes further in Daniel 11, right? It's explained in that in Daniel 11. So how I understood it, how I understand it, is that this ram, powerful ram, represents Greece, Alexander the Great, his four generals, and also Rome, who conquers it. Because what does Rome do? Rome puts themselves in the place of God, reach to even the heavens, threw down the stars, right? And then this small horn actually comes from, it's the same horn that changes times and laws, puts itself at the throne of God, puts it before God, and becomes this power that for a time controls the nations. Okay, so like I know that a lot of people don't agree that Daniel 9 doesn't continue 8, but it does. It does because Daniel didn't finish in Daniel 8. 8 was never finished because it talked only about the rams, explained who the rams were, but it didn't finish with the 2300 days. It didn't finish with the time period that it was talking about, because it says for a time, what's going to give up for 2300 days, it's going to do what? It's going to have this power, right? And so what happens is that because he didn't understand that, because he didn't understand the 2300 days, Gabriel had to come back and explain it, because prophecy is never left by itself, because God wants his people to understand. And that's it even extends into Revelations, because Revelation talks about the end times. And so if you go even further into chapter 11, which I am trying to study even more, because chapter 11 is even more complicated than chapter 8 and chapter 9. So it's because it's just so heavy, so riddled with prophecy, so riddled with symbolism, that it's so complicated. But then we know that 12 talks about the end times, when Christ, when all of it's going to end, right? So, I mean, if you want to talk about Daniel 8, we have to also talk about Daniel 9. Because if you go to Daniel 9, because, look at 12:1, you can also see that. But 12:1 says, at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince who has charge of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble. Now, this time of trouble is what we would call the persecution, before the second coming of Christ. Catholics, for example, believe that Michael will also come down with Jesus, right? They think that. But also Muslims think, a lot of people think it because that's how they interpret it. It says, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never has been seen since there was a nation till that time. You know, so this time of trouble is actually called Jacob's time of trouble, or Jacob's, great troubling. In Revelation, it's the same thing. It says, but at that time your people shall be delivered, and everyone whose name shall be found within that book, which is the book of life, which is spoken of in Revelation as well. Revelation 20 talks about the destruction of hell, of death, of everything, of Satan, his angels, and that everybody else will be saved, right? Go back to Daniel 9. I'm going to show you something. Okay, so it says in the first year, because he's praying here, it says in the first year of Darius the son of Asarius, by descent of Mede, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived in the books of the number of years that according to the word of the Lord, to Jeremiah the prophet must pass before the end of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. Now the 70 years is a part of the no, it's part of the prophecy of 2300 days, but it's 70 years. It's something more distinct as well. It's a prophecy that you have to look in the prophet of Jeremiah to understand it. And then it says, then I turned my face to the Lord God, seeking him by prayer and pleas for mercy and with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession, saying, O Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. We have sinned and done wrong and acted wickedly and rebelled, turning aside from your commandments and rules. We have not listened to your servants, the prophets, and who spoke in your name to our kings and our princes and our fathers and to all the people of the land. To you, O Lord, belongs righteousness, but to us open shame, as at this day, to the men of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and to all Israel, those who are near and those who are far away, and all the lands to which you have driven them, because of the treachery that they have committed against you. Go down a little bit more, because this is all prayer, that he's just praying.
What verse you want?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at it. So here, Gabriel brings an answer. Daniel 9:20. So this is the point. While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God, for the holy hill of my God, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, which is the angel, whom I had seen in the vision at the first, came to me in swift light at the time of the evening sacrifice. He made me understand, speaking with me and saying, "O Daniel, I have now come out to give you insight and understanding." This is from Daniel 8, the last verse of Daniel 8. If you go back to Daniel 8, I'll show you what he doesn't understand, and that's what he's talking, why he's praying in the first place. So go back to Daniel 8, in the last part of Daniel 8. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days because he didn't understand. He was so confused. Then I rose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. He understood because Gabriel explained the rams. He explained the rams with the two horns, and also the rams, the normal ram, and the ram with the one horn. That's it. So now when we go to the goat. Thank you. It's because I don't have my Bible with me. I'm literally in the mall. The goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken. This goat would be represented as Greece was broken. And instead of it, there came out 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. The winds represent powers, kingdoms. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. This little horn is the same horn from the 4th beast in Daniel 7. It's on the 4th beast. It talks about the horn that pops up out of the 10 horns, because the 10 horns were kingdom. This little horn destroyed 3 other horns. A lot of historicism, a lot of people in the church used to believe it, that this little horn was not the Catholic Church, but the papacy. They believed it was the papacy because this is exactly what the papacy did. What happened with Constantine? What? Anyways, Daniel 7, there you go. So if you go down, and it roots, it were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. The great things were blasphemies. And so in history, we know that the papacy, empowered by Constantine, because the Roman Empire was riddled with wars with the barbarians, and there were 10 tribes. What the Catholic Church did, the papacy did, is that they destroyed 3 tribes. We know in history that only 7 of the tribes that survived became nations. We have France, Italy, we have Spain, we have, I think, Germany, and a few others. The Britons, I believe, as well. All these tribes actually came together, formed a nation to attack Rome. And many of them, for example, King Alaric of, I think, the Visigoths, he sacked Rome once. But Rome's been sacked many times before it fell and it split off into different nations, right? At this time, the church was powerful, extremely powerful, and Constantine was converted to Christianity because he wanted the power of the church. to help them dominate these nations. That's history. Look it up if you want. It's okay. If you don't believe it, it's fine. It's history. So, I mean, like, it's not the main point. But the main point is this: that little horn that pops up between the four nations was Rome. After Rome come the Roman papacy, which is the religious orders that came and took and threw down many of the stars. Stars could represent angels, of course. Threw down the stars and trampled on the people. You know, I mean, it explained in Daniel 7. But before it was Rome, the Roman Empire. Afterwards, it
Oh,
became Roman papacy because of how the exchange of power became. The Vatican took over Rome. That's why Rome is a city-state, and how much it has.
right.
And so, yeah, so it says the prince of the host and the regular burnt offerings was taken away from you, and the place of the sanctuary was overthrown. What year was the temple, the temple that was in Jerusalem was destroyed? What year was it destroyed, and by who?
Right.
So,
So to kind of get to the issue, I don't mind granting that for time's sake that this
oh,
little horn is Rome. I don't mind granting that. Probably the biggest issue with the SDA position that I see, one that I don't think can be overcome, is verses 13 and 14.
okay, show me.
Yeah, so it
13.
says,
Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to me, to the one who spoke, for how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, to transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot? Said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary should be restored to. I understand why. So, okay, from how to explain this more. So, 2,300 days. The 2,300 days is a prophecy which started because Gabriel tells at the beginning of the building of the sanctuary, or the reconstruction of the temple, or the decree to rebuild the sanctuary, the temple, will be the start of the 2,300 days. There was 3 decrees in the time of Daniel. Okay, 3 decrees, but only one was fulfilled. The other 2 was not completely fulfilled. There was no call to do it until the year 457 before Christ. The reason why, not even just Adventists, but William Miller, a lot of people think he's a false prophet, but he wasn't a prophet. He just read it. He read it, and that's how he understood it, and he thought, well, the earth is going to be cleansed, Jesus is going to come back, but we all know that's not true, because we can't make a date when Jesus is going to come back. I can agree as a Christian that we do not know the time when Jesus is going to come back. It's impossible. Only God the Father knows. That's what Jesus says. Only the Father knows when I'm going to come back. That's what he said. And so he misinterpreted the prophecy, thinking that the cleansing of the sanctuary was the earth. And so in 1843, when it didn't happen, they went and studied and said, oh, well, because there's a year, I think he says there's not a year 0. That means that it's going to be 1844. And so when he does it, when he goes and they all wait for 1844 in October, it doesn't happen.
right.
And William Miller himself was like, okay, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to leave my house and do whatever I want, but I'm not going to preach this message anymore. I don't even know if I had it right or not. He was so discouraged. But Gabriel translates it. It says at the end of the beginning of the 2,300 days is at the decree to rebuild the temple, 457 BC.
Okay, so
If you add 2,300 days to, or 2,300 years to it, it comes out to 1844. Now, how long, for a long time, because how long was the Roman papacy in power? You remember in history that the Catholic Church, I think in 1798, was when the papacy actually lost its power. Until 1798, it was huge power until it was Bonaparte, Bonaparte who imprisoned the Pope, and where they finally decreed nope, no more. Because remember, France, the French Revolution was like, okay, no more religion. I'm done. We're gonna worship who we want. We're gonna worship our gods. We're gonna worship women. That's what they did. They took the priests, right? They took the priests out of the churches and out of everything, and they threw them in the streets. And they said, either you convert or we kill you. And many of the priests in the French Revolution left God. They left Christianity and they did what they wanted. And then the Pope was in prison and he died in prison. This was 1798 when he lost that power. A couple years later, in 1844, is when they translated as the interpreted the prophecy as that. Now, when you're talking about 13 and 14, that's what the papacy did. Well, okay, for how long? The Holy One speaking, and another one, Holy One said to the one who spoke, for how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot? How long did the papacy or the Catholic Church walk all over these sacred things of God? I mean, that was in the fourth beast when it spoke blasphemies, because the papacy has done that. It says, they say, we are the vicar of Christ. We are Christ on earth. We are basically God. They say that all the time.
Real quick. Okay, so you're saying that this activity right here is concerning the papacy, right?
Yes, me personally, and I mean, like, Adventists also believe it, because this is how we've understood it. And not even Adventists, I mean, it used to be Protestants. The early Protestant church believed the papacy was the Antichrist. The Martin Luther, even though Martin Luther didn't change Sabbath to Saturday from Sunday, because, he followed the basic laws and the rules of the Catholic Church, he still believed in the early church, the Protestant church, believed the papacy was the Antichrist because of what they did. Because he says that only God can forgive. Only God can forgive sin. But the papacy was saying, no, the priests can forgive your sins. But Jesus tells us that the only person who can forgive sins is him. You have to ask for forgiveness, and that's it to him. You don't go to anybody else. But the papacy was saying, we can forgive sins. We are God on earth. They also changed the times and laws. How they do that? In the Catechism and in the Catholic Bible. I mean, if you get a Catholic Bible, the Ten Commandments are changed.
I'm not disagreeing with the
okay
stuff. So the issue,
I'm
gonna lay out the issue for you. I understand a lot of this, but,
okay, I'm glad you.
Yeah, so you said that the starting of the 2300 is 457 BC. So we're gonna hop over to chapter
457 BC. Yeah.
Right. So at the start
Go to chapters. Yeah, chapter 9.
Right. So
the 70 decree.
Right. So
a decree about your people and your holy city.
The start of it is when the temple's being rebuilt, right? In the Jerusalem and
yes.
Okay, so the 2300, the start of the 2300 is actually the desecration of the temple. The reason why I say that here is in verse 13, the question is asked.
That's a part of it.
Well,
it's a part of it.
Watch this real quick, and then I'll let you. For how long is the vision concerning
transgression that makes desolate and giving over the sanctuary?
And then he goes through what
it's restored to its rightful state.
So it's concerning what? It's concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, the giving over the sanctuary, and the host to be trampled underfoot. We know it from verse 11 that the little horn is the one that does all that activity. Okay, so verse 14, he says,
"Yep.
Here's the answer: for 2300 evenings and mornings is
evening the sanctuary to be restored to its rightful state."
Right. So for 2300 evenings and mornings is how long the little horn will take away the regular burnt offering, make desolate. And so if we start that at 457 BC, that means that's when the little horn started its activity.
Yes,
You see,
because it's yes, no, because what he says, what Gabriel says, because he further explains it, is that at the beginning of what he says, I forget what verse it is. Let me check it out because I know I had it. Let me see. No, I'm in StreamYard, so it's okay. Give me a second. I'm gonna look at it. So it says, where in Daniel does Gabriel explain that the 2300 days starts at the rebuilding of the temple? Because there's a verse specifically. Um, okay, so because I don't have my Bible right here with
right?
me, and that's the problem. And
So,
because I came out
what are
with
you
my
looking
wife,
for?
but anyways, I was looking for the verse in Daniel that explains from Gabriel, explaining that at the beginning of the decree to rebuild the temple is the start of the 2300 or the 70-week prophecy. Because the 70-week prophecy is the start of the 2300 days. That's normally where it starts because the 70-week prophecy is a part of the 2300 days. And 70 weeks comes out as 490 years, or I mean, prophetic days in
Right,
years if we want to take the day for a year prophecy. And so, like, from there, that's where we would get 457 to the day that Jesus was crucified as being exactly that 490
right.
years or
I agree.
469 something.
I agree with that.
Uh-huh.
I agree with that. I'm not disagreeing
You
with
agree
that.
with that. You just don't agree with the whole 2300-day period. So the 2300-day period is the whole prophecy. Like, it's like the prophecy in general, right? So the 70-year prophecy is the start of that prophecy because it says that in 70 weeks that the Messiah will make, at the end of the 70 week, will make get rid of iniquity and sin, things like that. And then there's more prophecy to that. And that's why I said that Daniel 9 doesn't finish. Because Daniel 10 explains that Gabriel even comes again, but he was delayed by the prince of Persia fighting with him, and he had to call Michael over and like, hey, Michael, help me with the prince of Persia. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to explain it. And then the next chapter, 11, is when he even explains it further on. And then chapter 12. Chapter 9 is incomplete, much as Daniel 8, because it doesn't finish. That 2300-day prophecy does not finish. And that's what I'm saying. So it begins at 70 weeks,
Do
490 days, or
do you
490
understand?
years. Yeah, but
Do you
that's the whole point I'm saying. In the desolate of the sanctuary, that's what it is. The desolation of the sanctuary is during the 2300 years, which is
well,
not only the Roman papacy, but Rome itself, because in AD 70, the Roman Empire destroyed the the temple, the Jewish temple. And so what happened? The Jews couldn't sacrifice. Even today, the Jews can't sacrifice. They can't because there is no temple. Like the sacrifice and burnt offering has been finished completely because it's been destroyed. Because if you go to Jerusalem, you'll see it. It's destroyed. They don't go. They can't go to the temple and sacrifice, and so
right,
they
right.
don't rebuild one. So
Do you
yeah,
under do you understand my argument basically?
kind kind of. That's because you're looking at the
Well, okay.
desolation, and the yeah,
I'll walk through it again. I'll walk through it
well,
again. I'll walk
okay,
through it again real quick for you. Just give me a minute to break it down for you. So,
yeah,
you're saying in
yeah,
457 BC is when we start these 2300. Okay. So in chapter
yes,
9,
that's the beginning of the 2300.
right, right. Let me just explain real quick for you. So in 457 BC, in chapter 9 is the beginning of the building of the temple, the restoring of the people back to Jerusalem, and all that. Okay. So it's restoration in 457 BC is when that starts. Here in chapter 8, if we start the 2300 at that same time, what we are saying is that the taking away of the regular burnt offering, the making desolate, the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot happens in 457 BC. And why we would say that if we connected this with 457 BC is this. The question is asked for how long. So he's asking, how long is this vision concerning all this little horn activity? And the answer is given. The answer is it is for 2300 evenings and mornings. And then at the end of the 2300 evening and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored. And so we can't start the 2300 when it's already being restored. It has to happen at another time. It has to start at another time. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Yeah. So that is probably the main issue. And all these other side issues with it being Rome,
I know.
Greece, all that's fine. I can give that it's Rome. I have no problem with that. Okay, but the 2300
Okay.
cannot start when the
So
sanctuary is being restored.
wait, repeat. What did you say?
Okay, yeah, I'll walk through it again for you. So in verse 13, real quick, actually, I'll go up to verse 11. It says, the little horn became great, even as great as the prince of the host, and the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And so we agree that all this is happening by the little horn, right? Verse 11 and 12. Okay, yeah. So verse 11 and 12 is what the little horn does to the sanctuary and God's people. Verse 13 is when the holy ones come, and one holy one asks another holy one and says, he asks a question, for how long is this vision that was just explained concerning, and he goes through the regular burnt offering. So he goes through all the activity of the little horn mentioned in verses 11 and 12. He says, how long will all this take place? Verse 14 is the answer. He says, for 2300 evenings and mornings is how long this little horn will do all this activity. And then he says, and then after that, the sanctuary shall be cleansed or restored. So for 2300 evenings and mornings is how long the sanctuary is trampled, how long the host is trampled, and how long the regular burnt offering is taken away. And so we can't start that in 457 because in 457 is when all that is restored.
No, it's not talking about the earthly sanctuary. That's the problem. So remember that Moses was commanded by God to create a sanctuary as a shadow or an example of the sanctuary in the heavens. And this is where this is where the Millerites got wrong. And this is where Adventism started. So Adventists with Ellen White had to continue studying what the sanctuary was. And if we study Adventist history, we know that there's two people who, you can say, Emmaus, it was like the event of Emmaus, they called it that. They were in a field and they received a vision from God. So they realized what the sanctuary was. The sanctuary that most Christians believed was the earthly sanctuary, or the sanctuary in Jerusalem. No. The beginning of the 2300 days started, yes, with the rebuilding of the sanctuary in where? Jerusalem, right? But the ending of the 2300 days is not in the earthly sanctuary, but the heavenly sanctuary. That's the difference. Because in Hebrews talks about the heavenly sanctuary, but the heavenly sanctuary is not the same as, like in the same image of the wilderness as on the earth. No. The earthly sanctuary was supposed to be a didactic tool to teach the Israelites about salvation. That's the whole reason. So like the whole sacrifice, the lamb represents Jesus. Jesus even said it, I'm the Lamb of God, right? Because the sanctuary was supposed to represent Jesus, the process of salvation. First off, Jesus had sacrifice, right? The lamb had the sacrifice in the temple. They had to go and spread the blood over the sanctuary, in the sanctuary on the walls, as for sin. But in only one day in the year, which is Yom Kippur, which is the atonement day, which is what is talking about here. That it says the transgression, the only sin offering that can take away the transgression, right? That makes desolate is in Yom Kippur, the day of the Day of Atonement. That's the only day that they could do that. Jesus does that, is what we believe, in 1844. So it's not that the sanctuary is built on earth. More along the lines that Jesus changed his ministry, because the ministry of Jesus does not end at his crucifixion, right? Because it says in the Bible that Jesus is always interceding. Why is Jesus needing to intercede on our behalf if all of sin, all of the transgression is done away with? He would not need to intercede, because we would be written in the book of life for good. That's the point. Meaning that his mission is not done. When he said on the cross, it is finished, he meant the sacrificial part, which is the atrium where they sacrificed. But that wasn't the end of sin. They had to go, the priest had to go in, spread the blood on the walls, in Yom Kippur, which is one day in the year, had to go and cleanse the walls. And so what is taught, what I understand, is that when Jesus, in 1844, he was in the sanctuary, he was pleading before God, doing what he did, show he was the great sacrifice that God had sent for us. 1844 was the year that Jesus finished that part of the mission, of his mission, part of that mission, because he's in the second phase of mission, into the last part, which is the cleansing of the sanctuary, which is what we call the probation period, right before the persecution. And the persecution is what we believe, or I believe actually, that everybody on earth will go through persecution, but the people who are sealed by God will be saved from this persecution. And then right after, because this is in Daniel 12:1, says that Michael will stand up, but there'll be a great persecution, and then he'll come and save his people. Same thing. Jesus does the same thing. He comes while they get persecuted, and then they get saved from that persecution, and they get taken to heaven. Paul actually explains this in 1 Thessalonians 4:13-17, which says, "Don't worry, my brothers. Look, I know that people are dying," right? He says, "Don't worry about those who have died in Christ, because when he comes, he's going to resurrect them before he takes us up." Because the early church believed that Jesus was coming back in their day, but then people started dying, and they're like, "Oh no, people are dying. What happened? Can we believe in Jesus? Is this true?" So that whole point with the sanctuary is that he's entering into the holy sanctuary, which is the throne of God, and he is cleansing the sanctuary of the blood of him to write the names of the people in the book of life. That's the difference. That's what people get wrong. We're not talking about that the sanctuary on earth is going to be built again. No, that's destroyed for good. We're talking about the heavenly sanctuary, because remember, we don't fight against blood and flesh. We fight against what? Spirituality, principalities, ideas, religion, theology. None of it is physical. Even the Jews thought that. Paul thought that. Peter thought that. But it wasn't.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna come back to. I don't think the issue was actually addressed, which I understand you don't have a Bible in front of you, so it's kind of hard. No worries.
It's not addressed. Yeah.
I will. I'll explain again. So you granted that the 2300 starts with the restoration of the temple in 457 BC.
Yes.
Okay. So verse 13 though tells us that this 2300 is actually the opposite. The 2300 is about the taking away of the trampling of the sanctuary.
Yes.
So even though you did say that is the heavenly sanctuary, but you can't disconnect verse 13 from verse 14, because it's a question and an
But
answer.
I'm not. That's the whole point I'm saying. The transgression that it's talking about, the transgression that makes desolate, is the sacrifice at Yom Kippur. It's the only sacrifice that can be used to take away transgression. So we have to study. Okay, so the problem that people don't understand is that we have to study the whole sanctuary in the wilderness to understand that point. That's what I'm trying to say. In the Hebrew, the thing that happens in the sanctuary, Daniel 18:14, is nitzdak. It is the passive form of shetak, which means right, righteousness, or justify. It is telling us that the sanctuary we put right or justify. So the sanctuary that's being put right is the sanctuary in heaven because it's not put right. It's been trampled on. It's always been trampled on. The word for atonement is kippur. The word for cleanse is tahar. These neither look nor sound any like the word set, which is used in Daniel 8:14 to describe what happens to the sanctuary. No form of the word chesek are found in Leviticus 16, which describes the Day of Atonement activity. So what I'm saying is, what happens in the sanctuary in 8:14 is that Jesus is um, taking away the transgression, right? He's taking the transgression away from the heavenly sanctuary. Remember that I told you that the sanctuary and the sanctuary in the wilderness and the sacrifices and all that are symbols or shadows of what are things to come from Jesus. That's what they were. The sacrifice of the lamb was supposed to point to Jesus, and the cross was to point back to Jesus. That's the whole point. So the transgression is just a symbol. It's supposed to show the Jews because the Jews didn't have Jesus. They didn't. They didn't have Jesus to point towards. They had only what? The sanctuary. So they used languages like the transgression that makes desolate, which is the transgression that makes desolate. It's the sacrificial ceremony. It's the ceremonial acts of the sanctuary in the wilderness, and that's what I was saying. And so transgression is the word peshan. It refers to rebellion. And there's only one ritual that can remedy transgression is the Day of Atonement. So Leviticus, the transgression only occurs in chapter 16, which is the chapter that describes the Day of Atonement. That means even though it's not used here, it still is used as a language, as symbolic language to refer to that. Because remember, prophecy is symbolic. It's not physical. That's the whole point I'm saying. Like, what means by symbolic is it represents something. So the whole process of salvation for the Jews was symbolized in the sanctuary. For us, we have Jesus, but Jesus.
You there? Hey, Ulrich, it looks like your mic might have gone out, or your cell phone might have died, or something like that. I'm not sure. I'll give you a couple seconds, 30 seconds, whatever, to figure it out. If not, I'll just start talking and wait for you to come back. Right, right. The shadows show the substance, no doubt about that. So it looks like he's not. He might be. His phone might have died. Uh, uh, yeah, I do. Yeah, I was muting him. He's probably on a cell phone, and he's in Colombia, and he's in a mall. So, uh, looks like, yeah, he had some issue, got kicked. So, uh, the issue, right? So we can even grant that this vision, and actually for a while I have contemplated and thought about this. I believe it was Clement of Rome or Alexandria in the early church who taught that this vision here was concerning Rome, what happened in the fourth kingdom in 70 AD. I actually have no issue with that. I see why it could be that. And even if that is the case and that ends up being true, the issue is this. This is the central issue. Now notice Ulrich said that the 2300 starts with the restoration of the sanctuary, but it's actually chapter 9 that talks about the restoration. Chapter 8 here, the time part here of chapter 8 is the trampling of the sanctuary. Excuse me, man. You take some allergy pills. um okay, well, what was I saying? Oh yeah, the 2300 starts with the trampling of the sanctuary, okay? And so we can't connect it to a vision where the start point is the restoration of the sanctuary. And so this could be happening in the time of Rome, um, but we have to say that these transgressors here, okay, in verse 12, are why and what bring about the activity of the little horn. Because when we drop down here to verse 30 or 23, excuse me, it says, when the transgressors, the same ones in verse 12, have reached their limit, this little horn arises. So little horn arises because of these transgressors. So even if he was to say that this is Rome, and we grant that, they the little horn only arises out because of these transgressors reaching their limit. So that means that the transgressors have to be the Jews either in the 2nd century BC or the 1st century AD, whichever one you want to choose. I'll leave that up to you. Either one can fit. I would say the one in BC fits more, but if you want to pick the one in Rome, that's fine. And so these transgressors reach their limit, which causes the little horn to rise. And when the little horn rises, what does he do? He takes away the regular burnt offering. He overthrows the sanctuary. And then he throws down the stars, the host of heaven. He tramples on them. And that is why this question is asked. So if I was to ask you, if anybody's watching, I'm not sure if anybody's watching anymore. So if somebody's still listening, okay, and I was to ask, for how long will it take you, whoever's listening, to come to my house? And you answer back and you say, for 1 hour, and then I will be at your place. You've answered the question that was asked. So that means the travel time is the 1 hour. And then the completion of the 1 hour is you arriving at my house. That's verse 13 and 14 here. So um let me look. See, I don't see him coming back yet. I'll give him a few more minutes. Oh, there he is. You there?
I found the verse that I was looking for. You want to?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Tell me which one it is and I'll go to it.
If you go to Daniel 9, 9, Daniel 9, we need to go to Daniel 9. Yes, I'm here. So
Yeah.
we need to go to Daniel 9.
Still there, Ulrich? Looks like he may have a bad connection, which happens. And understand that my guest is not at home in front of a screen or with a Bible open. He is in a business. So he is doing this off of memory. And so that's pretty cool, pretty impressive. So it looks like he's having a connection issue. So I'm going to restate the central issue is that what the SDA position is saying is that these 70 weeks here in Daniel 9, okay, the decree to restore the people, the city, and the sanctuary, which starts in 457 BC. This starting point is also the starting point for these 2300 years, but you just simply cannot do that according to the language of the text. It's pretty simple and it's pretty straightforward. For how long, and remember the little horn activity is described in verse 10, 11, and 12. It says, the little horn grows even to the host of heaven and tramples the host of the heaven and the stars. It becomes as great as the prince of the host, takes away the regular burnt offering, and the sanctuary is overthrown. Okay. And all of this, the little horn arises and happens because of these transgressors, whoever you want to say they are. The little horn arises and takes away the sanctuary and the regular burnt offering and tramples the host. It's because of the transgressors. Okay. And so right after the little horn activity is shown, the question is asked, for how long is this chazon concerning all of this? The answer, I'll say the answer is for 2300 evenings and mornings. If your eschatology starts this when the restoration happens, it's missing the point and it's not interpreting the text properly. Let me see if I got
9. Go to Daniel 9, 25 to 27.
Oh, hey, there you go. Give me a second. Somebody's at my door.
Okay.
I'm going to answer the door.
Okay. Okay.
All right, I'm back. Sorry about that.
No, Daniel 9, 25 to 27.
Gotcha.
This is the verse I was trying to look for earlier because I couldn't remember it. So 25, 27 says this. So the 70 weeks starts when? It says, know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 72 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moats, but in a troubled time. So what I understand this is talking about the decree to rebuild Jerusalem. And you minus 490 years from that, you get 457 BC. It's the only one. There's 3 decrees. There was one for Jerusalem and there was one for the temple. There's another one during, I think, Babylon that explains it. So these 3 decrees during these times were the start.
Hey, Ulrich, we might have to. You keep losing connection, and there's really strong echo. So we might just. I'll probably make a few comments, then I'll probably just end the stream because it looks like We'll need to set it up where you're at home and your connection is more stable, and you have like a proper microphone in your on you that you can talk to instead of or talk into instead of in your on your cell phone or whatever you're talking into. Um, so yeah, so the point he's trying to make is that these 70 weeks is the starting point of the 2300. And I think I made it pretty clear that is the actual issue of the SDA position, is that if you start the 2300 with the fourth at the starting point of the 77s, you have a taking away of the sanctuary and the taking away of the regular burnt offering, and you have it bringing it back at the same exact time. And you can't separate the activity of the little horn with the 2300 because the text is pretty clear. There's a question for how long, there's the answer for 2300. It's pretty straightforward. And so if your system is separating these two and saying the 2300 is separate from the activity of the little horn, I think what's happening is you're trying to impose a system onto the text and trying to make it fit as opposed to just understanding the text. We can say that this activity, all this happens during the fourth beast. That's fine. Let's say the little horn that comes up is the fourth beast. Fine. I'm okay with that. Let's go with that. We know there was only one time where there was transgressors that caused the little horn to rise. That's in 70 AD. And actually I would say that, well, I won't get into that now. It's a minority position on the interpretation of chapter 9, but the transgressors are pretty clearly the Jews. So I don't think the SDAs will say that these are God's true believers that are the transgressors that cause the little horn to rise and to persecute and kill them. If they do, I'll leave that to them to make their case with that. And then right here, verses 20 to 25 is the interpretation of what was just given to him in verses 3 to 14. That this is the interpretation. It repeats it, it recapitulates it. It's pretty clear. You got the kingdom of Persia, Medo Persia, Greece, and the rising of the little horn because of the transgressors. That is key. That is another key issue right there. These four horns are the four kingdoms. It's all pretty clear. It's recapitulated here. Now, a point that they will make is that this vision here cannot be about the third kingdom because it is referring to the latter end or the appointed time of the end. The point I would make with that is that the latter end of the indignation, which is God's wrath on what? It's God's wrath on these transgressors that have reached their limit. And so whatever this appointed time of the end is appointed time of the end is referring to God's wrath on these transgressors. And I don't think the SDA position is supported by that as well. So with that being said, I think I'll set up a time with Ulrich when he is at home and has a Bible in front of him and we can walk.
But no, wait, before we finish. The problem with Daniel is that the prophecy isn't completed at Daniel 8. And that's why Daniel doesn't understand it. Because Gabriel presents to him the 2300 days, and he's like, what is the 2300 days? This doesn't make sense. And then Gabriel comes back to him in Daniel 9, he's like, hey, okay, I'm going to explain to you part of the prophecy. But he doesn't end there. Because what the problem is that we keep skipping over and going back to Daniel 8, 13, 14, and getting caught up on that. Because what you're doing is you're disconnecting the 70-week prophecy from the 2300-day prophecy. They're not separate prophecies. The 2300 days is the full prophecy. Gabriel comes back in Daniel 9 and explains 70 weeks of that prophecy, which is 490 years. That's the thing. But he doesn't even finish there, because after that, he goes to Daniel 11. And Daniel 11 explains even further about this power that comes and does a bunch of this stuff, and it started with Rome. And then it says in Daniel 12 that the Messiah will rise up, or Michael will rise up. That's what it said. Michael will rise up, the prince of your people will rise up. But before that happens, before he comes, what's going to happen? There's going to be a persecution. And the persecution is in the future. But we keep disconnecting the 70-week prophecy from the 2300-day prophecy, which is not a disconnection. You shouldn't disconnect prophecy, because it makes no sense for the 2300-day prophecy to be in Daniel if we disconnect the 70-week prophecy. Because the 70-week prophecy continues, or it begins what the 2300-day prophecy is, and it starts at Jesus. And then we get into the gospel, and then we get to John, the revelator, who explains even more about these powers to be and things, and the Antichrist and things like that. But what's happening here is that you are disconnecting the whole prophecy, the 2300 days, from the 70-week prophecy because of 13 and 14. But the transgressions of the desolation, the desolate, is that the rebellion of sin, and that's what it's talking about. It's the language it uses. It prefers to use that language as rebellion. And what's the only sacrifice that can pay for the rebellion, which is Yom Kippur, which is the cleansing or the restoration of the temple in heaven. The reason why it needs to be restored in heaven is because it's covered in blood. That's why it needs to be restored. Every year the temple has to be restored to its original state, which was clean, without sin. That's what this whole transgression of the desolate is. It's the wiping away of sin completely. And that's why you can get to the point of the 2300 days from 457 BC to 1844, because if you take 457 and go all the way to 1844, how many years is that? 2300 days or 2300 years. Because prophecy is not, God's timing is not the same as ours. A day can mean a year. A day can mean 1,000 years for God. But that's the whole point. Prophecy is symbolic of what is supposed to happen. It's a shadow, because man cannot understand the works of God. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You keep disconnecting it only by 13 and 14 because you don't understand. A lot of people don't understand it because the language is so complicated about the transgression of the desolate. And in the temple language, the transgression of the desolate is talking about the rebellion, the sin against God. And the only way to cleanse that or make it new, make the sanctuary new, is by cleansing it completely at Yom Kippur. And that's what it's talking about. That's why 1844 is important, because 1844 is the time, the year that Jesus entered the most holy to cleanse the sanctuary. Cleanse the sanctuary. That's what I'm saying.
Is that your wife honking at you right now?
No, that's not my wife. That's outside. I had to come outside because my wife can't drive. She doesn't know how to drive. I'm the only one who drives her. No, I'm outside because inside my Wi-Fi is really bad. I fell out of the call for so many times. But yeah, I mean, like, we keep disconnecting 13 and 14 from 8, which if we read it in succession, because remember, the Bible wasn't written with chapters or numbers. It wasn't. It was written as a succession. Daniel was writing Daniel. He didn't just write, numbers and all, and then separated 8 and 9. No, 8 and 9 is succession of each other. Like 9 is a succession of 8, and it's just a translation of what Gabriel was telling about the 2300 days. What's going to happen for 70 weeks? He tells them the first part of the 2300 day prophecy with 70 weeks, which is 490 years from the building or the rebuilding or the decree to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple to when? To Jesus' time. That's 70 weeks. And then you take 490 years off of off of that, off the 2,300 days, how many days is that? 1844. It's 1,844 days or 1,844 years. And it's not because I'm caught up on this idea that that Miller was right or anything like that. No, because when you study theology, you understand that the Bible is written a certain way. It's not written how we think it's written. Daniel 6, I think it's Daniel 6, is actually a history that was written before one of the earlier chapters. Literally was written before. It was, I mean, the Bible was written in a certain way that some people just need to understand and study more and more. So prophecy, when we study prophecy, we understand that when God gives us a certain period of time, there is no disconnect from it. You cannot separate 70 weeks from that and then just wait for the next. Because if we say, for example, no, the 70 weeks started with Rome, it started then. No, it started in Babylon. I mean, not like the 70 weeks, but the call to rebuild Jerusalem started with Babylon and it started with Darius and Cyrus and all those. You know, it started with them when they were in captivity, when Israel was in captivity. And so it says, this is when the 70-week prophecy starts. Starts at the decree to rebuild Jerusalem.
Wait.
So yeah, I mean, that's the beginning of the 2,300 days.
This transgression that makes desolate, is this the same one in chapter 9, would you say?
Uh-huh.
You'd agree that's the same one?
Daniel, yes, because Daniel didn't understand the prophecy of the 2,300 days. And then in 9, he's praying about it. He's praying, God, please help me understand. Forgive us of our sins. He's praying because the reason why he does that, why he prays for the people and for his sins, is because he wants God to answer this prophecy. He wants to understand more. And so Gabriel comes and he explains the 70-week prophecy, because for the Jewish people, the Messiah was the most important point of everything, because you know they wanted salvation. They wanted to be away from rulers. They wanted their own nation. Why did Peter thought Jesus was coming to be a king on earth and not in heaven? Really? So Daniel 9 is just a continuation of an explanation of the 2,300 days, because Gabriel didn't even finish that point. You know.
I want to. I'm curious. So, are you in chapter 8, verse 13? It says the transgression that makes desolate.
The transgression is the rebellion. It's the rebellion.
Would you say that is the same transgression that makes desolate in chapter 9 that is mentioned in verses 26 and 27? In verse 26 and 27 of chapter 9, it talks about the abomination of desolations. Is that the same one in chapter 8, or is that a different one, would you say? So if you look on my screen, I have it pulled up here.
Yes, that's the because in 8, okay, go here. It says here, be cut off and shall have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come, okay, yeah, who is to come shall destroy the sin of the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood. To the end there shall be war, desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. On the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. So this is talking about Jesus' sacrifice. This is talking about the Messiah coming, making a covenant, which was the new covenant, dying for his sins so that we have salvation fully, right? But the 70-week prophecy is not the end of 2,300 days. That's the beginning. That's what I'm saying. So when it says till the end, to when the sanctuary is cleansed again, which is in Daniel 8, when the sanctuary is cleansed again, we believe the sanctuary that is supposed to be cleansed is the sanctuary in heaven, because Jesus has to finish his ministry of cleansing the sanctuary as our high priest. He's called our high priest in Hebrews. He says, Jesus, we have a high priest who knows our afflictions and our troubles and all that stuff. And so what's the point of a high priest if he's not cleansing anything? He didn't cleanse the earth. If sacrifice, if Jesus' sacrifice on earth was the fulfillment of all of salvation, like he didn't need to do cleansing, he didn't need to do all of that, then why are we still here? Why are we still on earth? Because everything is finished. There's no reason to have any worry. Why are we still on earth? If Jesus is going to come, why is he waiting so much? So the cleansing the sanctuary is the last department, the last mission of God to cleanse all the earth of sin. It's to cleanse it, bring its people to heaven, destroy sin and death and Satan and all that, and the final judgment, which is in Revelation 20. And so that's the judgment is right after the complete cleansing of the sanctuary in heaven. So what it's talking about here, the desolation, is that the desolation that it's talking about is the transgression the desolator is the person who transgresses against God. We're called desolators, or the one who causes us to be desolate, to be without God. So that transgression that causes desolation is sin, rebellion. And so rebellion is the thing that Christ is trying to fix, the rebellion that we have.
Okay. So I apologize. I wasn't able to follow too much. Are you saying that the transgression that makes desolate in chapter 8
Don't worry.
is the same one in chapter 9? Or are they different transgressions?
So different transgressions.
So chapter 8 verse 13 has the transgression that makes desolate. In chapter 9 it has
the transgression that's cleansing of the sanctuary. That's because chapter 8 is about the whole message of the 2300 days. But 9 is part of the 2300 days. It's not the complete fulfillment of the 2300 days. It's only 490 years of the 2300 days. It's not the complete one. 8 talks about the whole prophecy of the 2300 days. That's the difference. We connect them because the 70-week prophecy is the beginning of the 2300 days.
Right. Okay. So the desolations that are decreed here in chapter 9, and on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate. This right here is referring to the earthly sanctuary, correct?
The rebuilding of Jerusalem is talking about the earthly sanctuary, but the sanctuary with the 70-week prophecy is talking about the earthly sanctuary as well. But 70 years after Jesus, the sanctuary was destroyed.
Okay, so is that what chapter 9, verse 26 and 27 is talking about? These desolations are decreed, and the abomination of desolation. Is that referring to the
abomination? Yes, it's talking about the earthly sanctuary. It's not talking about the heaven.
Okay, so and then you're saying here in verse 13 that this transgression that makes desolate, which takes away the burnt offering and all that, is not the earthly sanctuary, but it's the
13 and 14. So, and the host will be given over together with the transgression, with the truth to the ground, and a prosper. So here, when it's talking about the transgression, what's happening is it's the cleansing of the sanctuary in the 2300 days. At the end of the 2300 days, is talking about the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary. But this is most likely talking about the let me check it again. And 13. I heard the Holy One speaking. For how long is the vision concerning the one that is talking about to the end of the cleansing of the sanctuary for the transgression? That's talking about the heavenly sanctuary. But if it's talking about in between that, before that, it's talking about the earthly sanctuary. Because at the end of the 2300 day period, when it ends, is when the cleansing of all of this transgression is going to happen. But when it's talking about transgressions of the desolator and stuff like that, that's talking about the earthly sanctuary until it was destroyed, in 70 AD after death.
Okay, so in chapter 9, it's using basically very similar language to chapter 8, right? So in chapter 9, I'll go back here real quick.
Uh-huh.
It's talking
Yes,
about,
because it's sanctuary language, yes.
right, but you are making a distinction that this one is referring to the earthly sanctuary, but then chapter 8 is not.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay,
because if 8:13 is talking about the cleansing of the sanctuary at the end of 2300 days, it's the heavenly sanctuary. But in the 70-week prophecy, it's talking about the transgression. It's talking about the earthly sanctuary because what happened is Jesus did away with sacrifice and ceremonies at that time. That's why we
right.
don't have to sacrifice because Jesus is our sacrifice. No.
So who are these transgressors in verse 12 of chapter 8? Who would you say those are?
And the host be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression. So the transgression is our sin. So it'll be given over, and anybody who goes against God, the ones who goes against God Himself, it could be the religious host that goes against God to form a new religion,
And
or form a religion that's not the true religion because of the
so,
transgression, and it will throw truth to the ground. This is talking about the ones who trample over God's law and over God Himself and over His people.
okay, so they are not only like apostate Protestants, but also the papacy
Yes,
and
you're correct.
everybody else. Okay,
Yeah,
so
any religious group that doesn't follow God. That's what it is. So it's not if people kind of misconstrue what we try to say. I don't believe that the Catholic Church itself is evil. I think the papacy, because there's people in all churches who follow God. Everybody follows God, but there's people who don't follow God. Even Adventists. There's some Adventists that don't follow God correctly, right? So I mean, like anybody who is against God is apostate and the transgressors. Yes.
okay, so in verse 23, I believe this is referring to the same transgressors in verse 12. And in 23
Okay.
here, it says, at the latter end of their kingdom, that is the four horns, four kingdoms, when these transgressors have reached their limit, that is when the little horn arises. And so
Which
you're
I
you're
translate as
saying,
Rome.
and so you're saying these transgressors here are is the papacy and
No.
Protestantism, or
No, what I'm saying is the four horns is the generals of Alexander the Great. The one horn is basically Rome coming out and forming from that because that's what they did. They assimilated people, the Greeks, into their religion, into their life, and so that's what happened. They assimilated with gods and everything like that. And then after a while, it became the papacy. But it wasn't at first. It was Rome. The little horn that comes up is Rome, and then it grows out as the Roman papacy. Because what happens to Rome? It dies, and the Roman papacy grows out of it. Same thing as Rome did to Greece. Greece conquered, and they brought in little states into their little Greek states into their countries, and then they made the Roman state.
so who are these transgressors in verse 23 as opposed to those in verse 12? Would you say they're different groups? Because in 12 you said
I think they're
the
the same group. I think the same group because in the latter end of their kingdom, which is the latter end of Greece, when the transgressors have reached their limit, which is what happened with Greece, Rome took over. So in 24, it taught his power shall be great, but not by his own power, and he shall cause fearful destruction and shall succeed in what he does and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. So that's what the Roman church did, not the Roman church, the Roman state did, the Roman power, the Roman Empire.
okay, so he knows here in verse 23 it says, uh when these transgressors have reached their limit, that is what causes this little horn or this king of boldface to arise. So it's these
Yes.
transgressors that keep transgressing. Okay.
So
And so this little horn, which you
the
would say is
transgression.
the fourth beast, has not necessarily risen yet because the transgressors are still transgressing. And once they reach their limit,
Correct.
then this little horn arises. So it cannot be
Correct.
Protestantism and the papacy and all that, right?
Not at the moment. No. It has to be because Protestantism came out years after. Woof. 1,000 years or so, no? So I mean, like, it wasn't Protestantism at that time. It is only spoken of more of the Protestantism, the apostasy, and Revelations. It goes further into that power and like, but in Daniel, no, it just focuses on worldly powers and also persecution, and then Michael.
Oh, okay, okay. So these transgressors would be, you would say they are who?
Earthly power. So, Greece for generals, and then Rome. Because what happened? Greece split up because Alexander died. Four generals were fighting, killing each other, took over their land, and then Rome comes in, conquers them, and it was super easy. It was easy for them to conquer because they were already broken up.
Okay, yeah. Okay, cool. I understand a little better now. All right. So I would say those transgressors
Okay, yeah, no.
are the Jews, whether we say it's the third kingdom or fourth kingdom, even if we say it's Rome, I say that these transgressors are the Jews that reached their limit. That's why here in verse 19 you have the latter end of indignation, which is God's wrath being poured out on these
But God's
transgressors.
wrath But remember that God's wrath was over all nations. The Ninevites, remember them? They weren't Jewish. Balaam, the prophet of Canaan, he was a prophet of God. He died because he transgressed against God. The one thing that Christians don't really study or understand is that when God was talking about people, he was talking about all nations. God didn't just choose the Jews. He chose all nations to be a part of him, but they chose not to. Why do you think God allowed Edom and all these Amorites to be destroyed? Because he says their time of judgment has come because they have not worshipped me. So they're not Jews because in the sense of God is talking about all people. He's talking about the people who transgress against God, who would be the other nations, the pagans, because they don't want to follow God. They choose not to follow him. They choose to follow other gods. That's why Paul was always trying to convert Gentiles, because he understood that in Jesus, in God, there was no difference with Jew or Gentile. They're all the same. So these transgressors could not be Jews because they were all powers. They're all, and Daniel, he's talking about powers because Daniel was a king, prince. He was prince of Israel, and his main focus was powers and not the religious side of things, but more of the political side of prophecy. But Revelation goes into the spiritual side of Revelation, and also has a little bit, of Daniel, and it has some political in the sense of the beasts, um, but this couldn't be Jews because the transgressors would be those transgressing against God's law. Who would that be? The pagans, because at that time they were not transgressing his law. The problem with the Jews was that they didn't have mercy and love. They didn't have mercy and love. Isaiah says that, 58 verses 6 to 8. It talks about, the true fast, or, oh, this is what I want, that you have mercy and love for your neighbors. I mean, the whole problem with the Jews was not because they transgressed the law all the time, but because they just have love. They did worship other gods, but in this sense, it's more about powers because the four horns resemble, and we already know. Gabriel translated who the two rams were, Media Persia and Greece, and there are horns that come up, and who are the only ones who were the leaders after Alexander the Great, the generals. So it's more political than it is spiritual because of Gabriel's translation of that.
Okay, so I would definitely 100% disagree with that interpretation. I think the four kingdom, the four beast systems, directly have to do with and involved with the Jews. You have Babylon,
But it
which
doesn't,
does what with the
because
Jews? You have
Daniel translated. Daniel translated in Daniel 7 and 2. Daniel 7 is related to Daniel 2. And we know who that beast is. The beast isn't spiritual, it's political. The spiritual side of it is the one little horn that rises up in the 10 other horns, which are kings, because Daniel translates it. Daniel says these 10 horns are kingdoms. They're kings. And the other one is much greater than those. So the fourth beast isn't religious, it's political. Because it says the kingdom that comes after what? Greece. The kingdom that came after that was Rome. It wasn't spiritual. Daniel translates it. That's why we need to read all of the prophecies from Daniel to understand the 2300-day prophecy. Because Daniel translates it. He also tells it. He says in Daniel,
So looks like his mic. His connection might be acting up again. And I gotta go here in a minute anyways. Let me read through some of the comments. Stefan says, aren't you just trying to confuse your guests? I'm not sure how I'd be trying to confuse them. I'm trying to walk through the text. I would say that he's the one who's jumping around a lot, which makes it more confusing for a lot of people. But if you just walk through chapter 8, and this isn't just disagreeing with the fact that it's connected with the other visions in the book of Daniel, but the issue is how we want to connect it. And then let's see here. Yeah, this seems to be an arbitrary distinction there. I would say they would go off of some verses in the New Testament, but really, I mean, saying that these transgressors are not the Jews and that these beast systems don't have to do with the Jews directly is a pretty bold statement in my opinion. You look through, let's go through the 4 systems, right? You got Babylon. Why was Babylon mentioned? Why was it talked about in these visions in chapter 2 and chapter 7? Because of the interactions it had with the Jews. It was God's instrument to bring the curses for transgressing the covenant, and took them in this captivity for 70 years. That's what Daniel 9 is talking about. These 70 years is captivity because of their transgressions. You got Medo Persia, the second beast system. What does that have to do with directly? With the Jews. With what? With restoring the Jews, with allowing the Jews to be restored back to their city, and also giving them the funds to do so. The third beast system. Why is the third beast system, which is Greece, why is that mentioned? Because it has to do with interaction with the Jews. Namely what? Well, I would argue that history shows that chapter 8 is what this is about. It's about a shadow or a first time showing of, not even say first time, I guess you could say first time showing of an antichrist figure and his activities and what he does to the people of God, namely tramples on them, throws the sanctuary down, takes away the sacrifices, which we see happening again in the 4th beast system, and we'll see again happening at the end of time. The 4th beast system also has not only future fulfillment, but definitely has a direct fulfillment in the 1st century with the Jews. So to say that this has nothing to do with the Jews is, I would say, it's a pretty far stretch in my personal opinion. Right. I'm not sure why he's saying that. That's pretty wild accusation in my opinion. Well, to be fair with him, he is, and I know you weren't here when it first started, so you don't know this, but he's in Colombia and he's on his cell phone and he was in the mall, so the connection wasn't that great. But before I close, I'm going to go walk through the issue that I have, the main issue. And I don't think he actually, if you listen to the live stream, play it back, he didn't answer this question. And so what he's doing is he is saying that the 2300 starts when you start these 77s, which is in 457 BC. He says this starting point is the same starting point for the 2300. Now, the issue here is what? Is that this is about restoration, about restoring the Jews to the Jerusalem, about the city, about the sanctuary all being restored. Okay, that's what this is about. Chapter 8, the 2300, is about the taking away, the trampling of the sanctuary and the holy people. So I'll say this one more time, if he's listening, and for any SDA that's listening. Verse 10 through 12 is about the little horn activity and what the little horn does. It says the little horn tramples the host, some of the hosts, and the stars. It magnifies itself to the Prince of Hosts. It takes away the burnt offering, and it overthrows the sanctuary. Okay. This little horn that does all this, okay, the two holy ones arise, and one of the holy ones asks a question. Okay, the question is asked: for how long is all this little horn activity that is described in verses 10 through 12? How long is the regular burnt offering taken away? How long is the transgression that makes desolate? How long is the giving over of the sanctuary? How long is the host to be trampled underfoot? Straightforward question. The answer is given in verse 14. It happens for 2300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. So the example I give is, if I was to say, hey, Dustin, for how long will it take you to get to my house? You'll say, for 60 minutes, and then I will be at your house. So the question is asked: for how long will it take you to get to my house? And your answer, the 60 minutes, is the content of the travel time it will take for you to get to my house. And then the conclusion is the ending of the 60 minutes, which is, I have arrived at your house. That's the question and the answer given in verse 13 and 14. What the SDAs are doing are they are separating the answer from the question. They're saying the answer, the 2300, is actually not an answer to this question here, but it's just a general statement of 2300 evenings and mornings is how long it takes for the sanctuary to be restored to its rightful state in 1844. Rather, the answer for this in chapter, or in verse 13, is given in chapter 9. Do you see that disconnect? There is no support for that. That disconnect is synonymous. It's akin to the gap theory of the dispensationalists in chapter 9 between the 69th and the 70th week. It is the exact same thing. It's the exact same mishandling of the text, in my personal opinion. So they separate the question and the answer. So, with that being said, I think I'm going to end this because I got to go and I got to do some work and get things done for the day. Stephanie, it's very good to see you. I thank you for stopping by. I always appreciate you coming by. It says, let's go back and listen from good. Yes. Yeah, go ahead and listen. I let him talk and explain his position a lot. I think what you'll notice is that he does jump around a lot to make his point, which I think confuses things and does not actually make his point. Hold on a second, buddy. So with that being said, I appreciate all you guys tuning in and listening. Grace and peace to you guys. Hope you have a great day. God bless.